surprised and interested us about these chapters. Do you want to start, Rojas? And then you guys can go around. Okay.
So these are like, this run of chapters is like one of my favorite sections of this book, and like every time I read it, I just get so, this is just where sometimes it's weird, but sometimes even more than like the arguments and their ideas, just how they're made, just my brain just likes it so much. And it's the only part where I feel like all of the questions I have, Marx is like addressing, like he really takes the time to be like, especially in chapter 5, where it's like, wait, but what about, what if value, well, doesn't value come from just people charging more than what it costs them to make? And he's like, okay, let's walk through why that doesn't make sense. Doesn't value come from like use values, like everyone benefits and their use, and he's like, okay, here's why that doesn't make sense. And so just like the structure of these chapters just like makes my brain feel so fucking good, because it just like everything clicks for once, because the first 3 chapters are just so like disorienting and just like slap me around. So that's shit I really like about this. And I think also the power of this chapters for me is he's only like, it's so restrained, like you know how much power is behind these ideas, but he's only like hinting at it. He's only like giving you like a little tease of like, but when you go into the abstraction, what he's saying is like, there's this thing happening where like money is entering a market and coming out is more money. Like what the hell is going on here? It's like the whole engine of like capitalist wealth production is this like MCM formula, this like abstract ass thing. And he's like, what is this? What is like the like heart of this engine? And he like walks you like right up to it. And he's just like the only way this happens, like the heart of all of this is exploitation and violence. And he's not saying that, you know, he's not like getting all dramatic and intense. It's like this very logical, economic, like restraint argument. But it's just this moment where, yeah, just like the insight he has and like the power of abstraction to take this whole massive economic system and like break it down into these like simple little logical formulations and just be like, this is like the beating heart of our society right now, is like exploitation. And that shit gets me just like, yeah, I don't know, just like it's like an empowering piece of knowledge. And just these chapters just like get me excited to like fuck shit up. Yeah, I think the bit I'm confused about still, although I think I can explain it to myself, is like, so he spends like chapter 4 being like, there's these differences between CMC and MCM, and I get those, but then they're also the same, you know, like they're just different perspectives on the same flow. Like if you write a chain of exchanges, MCM, CMC, MCM, you can like just break it up into like different like CMCs versus MCMs. And then so that part, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that. But yeah, I'll stop if other people want to go. Popcorn Raymond.
Yeah. I don't think these chapters, I did read them in a kind of a rush, but I don't think these chapters were as like mine. Like I don't think I quite understand how all the puzzle pieces fit together still, which is kind of a vague question. But yes, I'm eager to dig deeper into this chapter. I think one thing that I like, and that it's a thing that like my mom says a lot, but I don't, and I know like why in my head this is true. Like, oh, capital creates more capital. That thing in chapter 4, and like, and Zach had put it like pretty front and center in the notes that he had written, right, for chapter 4. That there's this idea that money creates more money. But, and I like agree with that, but I'm curious like what Marx's like chain of events is that makes that happen. But I think most of it made sense. And yeah, the last part what I'm excited about, the last part, I just love his writing when he's like, oh, okay, we have to go into the factory, like we have to go where it's like businesses, what does he say? He's like, oh, we have to go where business, where people are not allowed to understand.
Let us therefore, in company with the owner of money, leave this noisy sphere, develop into the hidden abode of production.
Oh, no admittance except on business. That was like, that resonated with me.
Wait, what was it again?
No admittance except on business. And this idea of like, yeah, the factories being like these dark places that like ugly things happen in that, and that he's just kind of hinting at that, right? But that's like ugly things happen, and that's why it's not like for the public to see. And it reminds me of like the meat slaughtering industry, or just like generally like, yeah, really shitty factory conditions,
or even just like in restaurants, you know, like it's always in the back.
Yeah,
front of house versus back. It's like front of house where
like what's presentable, and like, you know, they're not washing their hands.
Of the blood of it.
Yeah, like there's a whole Paso Bakery story about that, but I won't go into it now. Where he was just like, oh, like if you cut yourself, then you can't bake bread as fast.
Damn. That is fun.
You just said that. But anyways, yes. Popcorn ramen.
I do have a question. I was gonna ask you.
Oh wait.
I was just gonna ask Rojas a question. Oh wait, I think Diego was this.
No, never mind. Popcorn Diego. So it's like,
no, I just had like a quick question. Like, what is it about this like flow of MCMC that like trips you up? Or is it, why is it like what? We're just confused, or like what? I think only because he spends chapter 4 like writing about the ways they're different, you know, and then at the start of chapter 5, he's like, these are really just different perspectives of the same flow. And one is like MCM is producing capital, CMC is not producing capital, but they're part of the same flow of exchanges, but just from different individuals' perspectives. And it like kind of makes sense. Like I'm like, oh, that is the answer. It's like it's just different individuals' perspectives on the same flow. One person can enter a market and not produce capital, and another person can enter a market and leave with capital. Yeah. But it's just still a little fuzzy. Oh, no, that's cool. Yeah. So.
Okay. Also, I feel like I should introduce myself because some people don't know who I am. I'm Ramin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm friends with Raymond and Lena. And I'm calling from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I live as of last night at 11 p.m. So, yeah, and I also, because I just moved, I haven't read anything. I watched like my extent of what I've done to prepare for this is reading part of David Harvey's lecture for this week. So that's my background right now. But as far as the half of David Harvey's lecture that I listened to, it was really interesting. And yeah, I think it was just like, just generally, it was interesting to hear about like, how do we differentiate money and capital, and how are those like connected things and also different things. And yeah, just like things that are like, I feel like this is really interesting because I feel like this has become really more aggressively normal now compared to like in Marx's day, like that, like people like expected to all have their, have their money in banks and invested in growing and stuff like that. Like, and so I think that's something that's like interesting, or something that's also like kind of confusing to me in this context is like, does that mean that the lines between like a capitalist and a non-capitalist are blurring at all? Like in that like capitalism is becoming more and more ubiquitous and less and like, I mean, like the system obviously has been ubiquitous, but like who is capable of producing capital and like making money through the system is really interesting. I don't know. I was considering some of that in terms of the implications, but there are also, of course, like parts of this that were just confusing to me. But I also didn't read anything, so I'm like, yeah. So I'm just like, I'm probably gonna like just try to listen more in this conversation before like next week I'll read more and be more engaged. But just so folks know.
Do you want to, thanks so much, Hermine. Do you want to popcorn somebody? I guess it's either me or Diego.
Yeah, I'll popcorn to Diego.
Yeah, I didn't get to chapter 6. I read 4 and 5. And those were like kind of straightforward. I guess there was that thing of differentiating but still being part of the same kind of thing, right? What you were saying. But I felt like it was pretty straightforward. I guess there's this one thing that I've been kind of tripping on ever since like I read it for the first time. And it's like, what is like Marx's response to like supply and demand? And I think he kind of talks about it in here, but I didn't quite follow. And maybe like someone else can like help me. It's like page 60, like was like last bit where he's like, the vulgar economics have practically no inclining to the nature of value. Hence, whenever they wish to consider the phenomenon in its purity after their fashion, they assume that supply and demand are equal, i.e. that they cease to have any effect at all. But then as regards the use value exchange, both buyer and seller may possibly gain something. This is not the case as regards exchange value. And so I'm like still kind of like, I didn't get that. I don't know what he means. I think this is a response to supply and demand. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe someone else can help me out.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think similar to Rojas, I feel like a lot of stuff did end up clicking for me, or it's just like a lot was essentialized in these chapters. It was just like, okay, what is capital? And it like comes up with a definition for it, and a lot of the processes are like clarified on. And so now I'm really getting a sense of like how much of my confusions will be clarified later, like how much process driven this text is, you know? And so he'll like make a thesis and then you're like, wait, what? And then later he's like, see, that didn't make sense, right? Let me like go further into it. And so it's just like, it's kind of funny. And he's also just so snide. It like makes me so happy. Like, I don't know, like every time he goes off in the footnotes about Ricardo or whatever, I just like chuckle. He's so angry. It's so funny. And then, okay, so yeah, it was interesting that it said where equality exists, there's no gain. I thought that was really interesting. And I was like, oh, profit is generated by inequality. And that's like really what capitalism can be boiled down to. Like, I just thought that was like a really core line. And then also about what we talked about last week, how we were like, oh, is money God? That kind of conversation. There was like a footnote where it said money has no master, which I was like, oh, it is saying that. It was just like a cliche in French or something, but I was like, I thought that was interesting. And then about family, it said family is an undiminished supply of labor. And I was like, say more, what the fuck? Wait, yeah, go off. What were you gonna say, Rojas?
I was just like, he will go off on that in a few chapters.
I'm so excited for that. That's exciting. And then I was confused about what happened in the 16th century to incite the world trade market. Like, why was that? Why does he say that that was the beginning of capitalism specifically? Like what in the 16th century made, yeah. Because that was like mid-Renaissance, I guess, in Europe. Like I don't know what he's referring to. And then or like what why was that when the world trade market started? And like just thinking about Europe. And then I was also confused about whether deception is required for the valorization of value. Kind of like going off of what was it, like, oh, like what Raymond was saying about like the hidden state of business. That's just deception. And so like, is deception just required for all for money to be accumulated more? Like that's a core part of the process. Yeah. Okay, and also just to summarize, like I liked how you did this last time, Rojas. You were interested by how all the pieces are fitting together and how the process of money is working, but was confused by the real difference between MCM, not Man Crush Monday. It's what is it? Money, capital, money, and then, or not capital, commodity, rather than CMC, which is commodity, money, commodity in that exchange. And then Raymond was like, it's not completely clicking. I'm still confused about the progression of commodities to capital. And then talked about like how interesting it was that there's a hidden state of business and like how that relates to just any industry that's kind of painful to have an in on, or like exploitation. And then Ramin said, describing the, like, this is interesting because it describes the difference between capital and money, and is also confused by how the lines are blurring between like how natural this system is, I guess, or like the ubiquity of it. Yeah, is that accurate? Anybody feel like I didn't represent their ideas well? Okay. Wait, y'all are muted, yeah.
Sorry, the one thing, Diego's question about supply and demand, was that on there?
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry.
Oh yeah, good point. Oh, duh, wait, Diego's thing, I didn't even read the bottom of the page. Oh yeah, so yeah, what's Marx's response to supply and demand? Yeah. And you found that at the end of the 6th chapter?
It's at the end of like page 260.
Okay.
Like chapter 5 or 4? 5, I think. 5.
Okay, cool. Okay, nice. So I guess we can start by, wait, how was the structure again? We can start talking about chapter 4 and like what we got out of chapter 4. And that was the like general formula for capital, where it talks about CMC and MCM. Yeah, I was curious, maybe I'll share the screen again and we can like look at what we can clarify Zach's definitions of, or like summaries of those chapters. Yeah. Does anybody have like anything that they would so wait, let me like start by reading his thing. It says, capitalism is distinguished from other economic systems by how it encourages its participants to start an endless cycle of wealth gathering, as opposed to systems where the goal of a participant might be to increase material wealth or satisfy needs and wants. In capitalism, constantly making a profit off of other people quickly becomes necessary in order to fulfill endless cash growth. Does anybody have anything, to say after that?
I think the one piece I have is in this chapter, and even in this section, Marx is not yet really making clear how profit is made off of other people. That is like the conclusion he's walking us, to the gates of the factory, to be like, what the fuck, where's money being made? It's happening in the factory. But I don't think has yet like made that argument. That would be like my one. The stuff I disagreed with that was like more maybe deeper was like in chapter 5 stuff. And a thought I had is I think a fun way to frame these chapters is like as a murder mystery kind of, where in chapter 1 we meet like the victim, where it's like, oh, what the hell? There's this thing where like money is magically by itself turned into more money. And then chapter 5 is him being like, okay, let's look at all these possible suspects. No, none of these work. And he like points us to like the heart of the mystery, like this contradiction where like, okay, profit is not made in exchanges and it's not made in production, but it also has to be in one of those because it can't come from anywhere else. And then chapter 6 is like the beautiful, just like, resolution of the mystery. That was just a thought I had that it could be fun to frame. Or for my brain, it helps to think of it that way, as him like thinking through a problem.
That's so good. And it's also like there's truly like a culprit too. Like I think that helps with the murder mystery thing, and it's like identifying who the murderer is kind of. Like it's so charged. I guess in that was like a chapter 5 thing where it's like war is robbery, commerce is cheating.
I could throw out like my own just verbal summary of chapter 4 and see if that feels good.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think in it, he's just trying to draw a distinction between market exchanges. That's like you have a commodity and you're trading it for another commodity with money in between. And once you have that, like that is a way of trading that is all about satisfying use value. I think that's like the important thing to get from CMC is like, people enter with 2 different commodities and they're like, I need your wine, you need my cotton, boom. Use values, everyone goes home, no more money is gained, super fucking simple. Things get trippy when it becomes MCM, where the perspective of the person entering the market, like the proto-capitalist, is entering with money and in the process somehow kind of mysteriously is able to leave with more money. And Marx isn't quite naming this as a mystery yet, but it's, he's just kind of naming it as like towards the end of the chapter, money which is worth more money, value which is greater than itself. Just kind of saying these statements that are like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, how is that possible? And yeah, that in this, because I think this is what Zach is getting at of like what distinguishes capitalism is this like MCM, this thing that changes money into capital, i.e. like this thing that produces more of itself in some mysterious way. You walk into a market with capital and you leave with more, and it's unclear how this is happening. But yeah, I think in chapter 4, he's just setting up that idea.
That is what confused me about chapter 4 is when it's just at the beginning, especially when he's just like, oh, you have this thing, you buy it for 100 and you sell it for 110 and then you make 10. And like both are just assumed to be like equal exchanges, right? Like in his thing, like in his framework, in my understanding, like all exchanges are equal. The marketplace is this place where only equal exchanges happen. And of course, like there's plenty of, Poco Loco sold that speaker for $35, but Walmart sold it for $58. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of like real world examples, right? Where it's like, oh, the market's not perfect like that, mm-hmm. And so that to me was like, are you just glossing over it, or like in theory, or you're working out later, right? Sorry. And then then only in chapter 6 he's like, oh well, that's because labor went into that thing that you bought for 100 and made into 110. Yeah. Right. And yeah, it doesn't go into like the intricacies of the market, because that's like the way I resolve that in my head is like when he's like, well, someone won and someone lost. Mm-hmm. So if you make a good deal, that means someone else got a bad deal. Yeah. Yeah. And so there is no value being made in that transaction.
Yeah. I think 2 things. One is I think the first point he would make is what you made, and he writes about this of like people think like, oh, value just comes from people selling
Like
things for
making
more
good
than they're
deals,
worth and
yeah.
making good deals. And he's like, you make a good deal this time, you make a bad deal next time. At the large scale of the market, it all evens out.
Yeah.
And it's as if everyone is selling at the true value, even if certain people can sneak you once. Well, that's when you're selling. When you're buying, other people are gonna be sneaking you. Like it all evens out.
So yeah, it's like this. I mean, that, and then like the hyper version of that is like, hey, is the stock market, or where everyone's like, oh, you can just make money on the stock market, easy money, like for Bitcoin or whatever.
And I think that the deeper point that your question gets at is Marx in this chapter and all these chapters. Oh, sorry, we're getting a bike sale.
¿Mande?
Hola, ¿cómo está?
Te preguntaba si no tendrías un túnica para los que van adentro de la lista 29.
29 tubes. Tenemos tubos, sí.
¿Dónde?
Sí, tenemos tubos.
No te oigo bien.
Tenemos tubos de 29, sí, señor. Ok, órale. Some guy just called and was like, do you guys have 29-inch tubes? And we were like, yeah. And he was like, cool.
Thank you.
And hung up.
Nice.
Sorry, super quick and then I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
The deeper point he's making is that in this chapter, and Marx like has all these little allusions to this is what he's doing, but it's not super clear. He's not trying to describe capitalism as it actually exists. He's trying to describe it as political economists at the time describe it, i.e. this place where no one is trying to cheat anyone. It's this perfect system. And he's saying, what he's trying to do is be like, of course, you and I can all think of all these ways that capitalism is actually nastier and more unfair and more unequal and has all these power imbalances. And, you know, consumers don't know everything about commodities. But he's like, those things exist, but I can ignore those things. I can take these political economists at their word about how fair and transparent and free capitalism is. And even then, I can show you how the heart of this is based on like producing an unequal society. And that's a thing throughout the book that'll come up is like all these moments where you're like, wait, this isn't like when he talks about labor.
I remember it's in the Marx reading guide.
David Harvey's
it's
the only reason I understood that.
Yeah.
So that was the two thoughts I had. But sorry, I'll let other people.
That's like when he was also using that like example. I was just talking about like the unevenness of it, where he's like, someone comes in with like $40 or like corn or something, and like someone comes in with like 50 of wine. The value is still 90, and like what was it? It like evens out. Like it's still like that same amount of like money still in the market or something.
It's like if you trade 50 of corn for the 40 of wine, someone made a better deal, someone made a worse deal. There's still 90.
Yeah.
There's no capital being produced.
Yeah. So it's like, how the hell do we live in this world? People just are making all this.
The part of Zach's summary that I think he like that I understood a lot, and I was like, oh, my mom says this all the time. Is like on page 1 in the PDF. It's like 107.
Oh no.
But
what does it start?
It starts like the restless never-ending process of profit-making alone is what he aims at. This boundless greed after riches, this passionate chase after exchange value, is common to the capitalist and the miser. But while the miser is merely a capitalist gone mad, the capitalist is a rational miser.
Page 254 in the Penguin.
Cool, thank you, Rojas. The never-ending augmentation of exchange value, which the miser strives after by seeking to save his money from circulation, is attained by the more acute capitalist by constantly throwing it afresh into circulation. And I guess this connects to like an idea that I've already had about capitalism, that where it's just like there's no like steady state to capitalism. Like capitalism requires constant like whether you want to call it growth or consumption, like like or exploitation, however whatever label you want to put on it. But yeah, just that like capitalism can't just be like, it always has to be like growing, and that is like in that paragraph there, and I think that was Zach's summary.
Yeah.
But he's not really like going into it yet. He just like hints it, right?
Yeah.
And then he's just like,
He's so slow.
and then he's like, but back to MCM.
This is a really something that was interesting to me that David Harvey said about this section is that like that like there's like the value that's created in circulation, and that in a sense capital equals value in motion, right? That like and that's why it's like hard to measure, and then also that like in times of crisis where there's no motion in the market, in those instances capital like doesn't exist. Like capital completely disappears because that motion is no longer existing. So like there's still money, there's still like wealth still exists, but capital no longer exists, which is a super fascinating idea to me. And then it's like miraculously resurrected when the market starts like moving and stuff again.
I remember forever ago hearing this like explanation of like the Great Depression and like how absurd what the thing you're talking about is, of like the need for motion, where they're like, during the Great Depression, like there was still houses that needed, like there was still human need still existed, and the example they gave was like, it would be like showing up to a construction site and they're like, oh sorry, we can't work today, we're out of like inches, like this abstract thing that we've created, money, because it's not flowing for these weird reasons that are like banking and take a while to explain, like this human construct that doesn't really, like inches. Oh, we ran out of inches, we can't fucking work. And yeah, I remember just tripping out on that idea.
This reminded me of, I think I'm so cynical about the stock market because we know how fake it is, and everybody's just like, I don't understand why, like why investments are essential to our economy. Because I was watching this, there was like an ad that popped up once, and it was this businessman being like, your money, like if it's sitting there, it is of no value to you. Like you have to constantly be investing and profiting off of the money that you already have. And so that's like actually the M to M, like, relationship that he talks about, like where it's like, oh, it's the, what is it called? Just like a shortened version of MCM. And that's like the stock market is just like money is producing money. Like there's, I don't even know how there's a commodity in between. And like I just saw on Venmo, there's like cryptocurrency that you can buy through Venmo now. It's like, and then Venmo makes a profit because you can like, you pay like for every, like you have to pay a fee to like put, like invest the money. And so now there are whole corporations that are just dealing in the, like, I guess the labor in that exchange is the commodity, Yeah. And then, wait, go ahead.
I was going to move on. I see if people wanted to move on to
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts.
That sounds good. I also had this question about like, and this was something that came up in chapter 2 for me. Where can I find it? Oh my God, I have no idea where it is. Wait, hold on. It was basically just like, I was wondering if, wait, let's see. Oh, if inflation happens because there's more labor imbued in the exchange. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that? Yeah.
Does inflation happen because there's more labor imbued in the exchange? More exchange is happening, and that's more labor, and that's how inflation happens. Is that too much? I sorry.
I'd have to like draw it out. Okay, because I see what you're getting at, where it's like the money, there is, so each like dollar bill represents in inflation like a smaller and smaller amount of value, which would mean a smaller and smaller amount of human labor.
That's
all I got.
And I guess like the more like you like the more people that are working, the more money is being made, right? Like everyone's getting a wage, so the more people are working, the more there's money, and then more money just causes inflation, right? Like, is that the train of logic?
I do know the times I think about inflation are like the trade-off between like inflation and unemployment, where it's like
there's a curve or something.
Yeah, there's some economists that came up with a curve, but then it turns out it isn't always true, and sometimes you can have both at the same time, and it's I always kind of, my brain breaks when I think about this shit.
That's a cool goal for me. That's like, oh, there's a curve. It has a name. It's called the Phillips curve.
Oh, it's in Ferris Bueller. There's a scene in Ferris Bueller where like, you know, he's like Bueller. Right before that, he's drawing the Phillips curve. He's like explaining to them that shit. Anyways, sorry.
Oh, one thing that I think could be helpful, and I realized I wasn't super solid on these, as you're talking about them, is like going over definitions for like capital, wealth, and value were the three that I had written down. Because I know when we were talking about like, oh, like in the marketplace, no capital is created, but there's just an exchange of wealth. Or and so like if there's like a difference between them.
And then we also curious about value.
Yeah. Well, and then of course there's two, like he always talks about exchange value and use value.
Oh, okay.
As like the two values. Yeah. But yeah, maybe definitions could be good at something.
True.
You want to say, Lena, on some of them? I can say what capital is.
Go for it.
Capital is just something that like is money that makes itself grow. That's my understanding of it. I don't know if anyone else wants to add something to that.
So money isn't growing, then it's not capital?
It's not capital.
Like
if you accumulate, that's wealth.
Okay.
If you accumulate money, that's wealth. But if you're using money to make itself grow, that's capital, right?
And then one part he says,
just for like
if now we take in turn each of the two different forms of which self-expanding value successfully assumes in the course of its life, we then arrive at these two propositions. Capital is money, capital is commodities. And then there's a footnote, but I didn't read it, but maybe I should.
Wait, I want to, just because this might be helpful.
Yeah.
If you go back to that section, because he does this often and it always tricks me up. He will make
Chapter 8
arguments, the arguments of other people. Like he'll be like, if you were a bourgeoisie economist, you would think this absurd thing. And I'm pretty sure that is an example of it. So that's what he's saying is like, so what Ramin was saying earlier of like, capital is value in motion. He's saying if you stop the motion, you'd be like, oh, what is capital? Oh, well, capital is money. It's this thing that capitalist is holding in their hands about to go buy a commodity. Or, oh, capital is the factory they just purchased. It's this commodity. But he's saying like, if you stop the motion, that's what you would think capital is.
Well, like, because then he's ongoing. In truth, however, value here is the active factor in a process, in which, while constantly assuming the form in terms of money and commodities, it at the same time changes in magnitude, differentiates itself by throwing off surplus value from itself. So that's what Diego's saying. Like the throwing off surplus value, the golden eggs it's growing.
Yeah.
In other words, the original value. In other words, it expands spontaneously.
Yeah, I think he says it like right in the middle of like the first page of chapter 4. There's a sentence that says the first distinction we notice between money that is money only and money that is capital is nothing more than difference in their form of their circulation. So like that, like money, like there's types of money that just like circulate to the extent that they like fill human needs. And then capital circulates in that it like completely, like the circulation is, I think it's just like it's limitless. So I think, but I guess that's describing like the circulation of capital more than it's describing like this is what capital is as a definition.
Well, I think they're the same-ish because capital is a circulation. You know, it's this process where like value is changing shape from like money, commodity, money, commodity, money, commodity, and in that it's generating this wealth. Like that process is what capital is. The example, because he doesn't give great examples, in my head is always like a worker who inherits a large amount of wealth. That's like the origin of the first M, who then goes and buys a fancy machine that then produces all these shirts for him, which he goes and sells at the market for more money, which he goes to get an even better machine to make more shirts and more money. And then he could buy a whole factory of machines and then a whole like, you know, nation state, and he overthrows Guatemala. And, you know, it's like this fucking crazy spiraling thing.
For me, it was property. That's what I thought of.
There's a sign at Jimmy John's that's like the description of that.
Whoa.
Damn.
Yeah, no, it's a weird ass sign. I took a picture of it like way long ago.
All of those signs are so weird. It's just like irony fucking with you. Like,
yeah, because all the signs are like, oh, just like the most things important in life is like having fun and like enjoying life, but then it's like not what that place is about.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that was really good. I also just wanted to say that like I think surplus value is like probably the one word that I focused in on in my like notes about chapter 4, because it's just describing what profit is and how capitalism runs off of that, or like requires it to continue moving, and then the movement is like the only thing that keeps it alive. And then also self-valorization is like how, like valorization, it seems like it's just how like value accumulates, or it's describing the inequality, and one thing is valorized over another. Do you think that's accurate?
I think the way I read it, because I was also tripping out on this, of like, what's the difference between self-valorization and valorization? And I think for me, it didn't quite become clear until I think like towards the end of chapter 5, there's an example he gives of, he's trying to explain why surplus value can't emerge at only the site of production. And he's like, you can't have a commodity and then that commodity just be worth more. Like if you're going to make it worth more, you have to like put more labor into it to make it like, you know, a better watch or whatever the fuck. And so that's like valorization, like the increase of value, but that is still attached to human labor, versus self-valorization, which is what capital is doing, which what he's going to show is that this isn't the case, that it is because of labor that it's valor, but it appears as if it is creating wealth out of itself. You know, like you go into the market with this money and you leave with this larger sum of money, even though you didn't labor, you just exchange things or whatever the fuck. Yeah, I don't know if that clarifies it all.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good distinction. And so in other words, self-valorization doesn't really exist. Yeah. Okay. And then I guess we can move on to chapter 5. And this is like, it's called Contradictions in the General Formula. And it's like, this is why MCM makes no goddamn sense.